Good morning, Humber Valley. Good morning, YouTube. My name is Trevor Brisbin, and thank you for being here for this. And to every woman who is a mom or wants to be a mom, has tried to be a mom, is like a mom, to every woman who has cared for another, nurtured another, worried about another, loved another, to every woman who has given yourself for the nurturing and care of life, who has birthed compassion and kindness in this world. Thank you. Like today, in a world where we can agree on almost nothing, we all agree, we all declare that you and your love are worth celebrating. So happy Mother's Day. Happy Mothering Day. You are a gift from God. Now, this morning, we're going to start a new teaching series that will take us right through to the end of June. To be honest, I wasn't sure what to call this series until last Sunday in Lobby Talk. That's where all the magic happens. Murray Smith pointed out that I use the word radical a lot in my teaching, which is really insightful observation, and he's absolutely right. The word radical is derived from the Latin meaning root. The idea is if something is radical, it's foundational in its essence. It's part of the very roots and DNA of a thing. Now, radical is also commonly used to describe something that's extreme or out on the edge. We say that person has radical ideas if their thinking pushes against the majority. The connotations of both like rootedness and extreme or subversive, when they're held together in one word, I mean, it's kind of brilliant. There are some things in their very essence, in their very existence, that push against the edges of the status quo. I'm convinced Christianity is one of them. Church should be one of them. Christianity at its core is an extreme way of love and self-sacrifice that pushes back against human antagonism, consumerism, racism, and violence. It's like at the very root of what Christianity is an extreme subversive counter-narrative to the status quo of our world. Its roots, its essence is subversive. It's radical. So we're going to start a series called Radical HVUC. Because of the essence of who we are as Humber Valley United Church, even in just existing as a church, we are radicals. People keep asking me, and it's a fair question, Trev, now that you're here, now that you're at Humber Valley, what are we going to do as a church? And my hope is this series will begin to lay a foundation for some of that conversation. And I mean, the last thing I want to do is sound flippant about it, but one of the things we're going to do is make sure we continue being the church. Because when a church embraces its identity as an incarnation of Christ in the world, St. Paul calls it the body of Christ. Like, that's radical. We aren't the Lions Club or the Rotary Club or a country club. We are the embodiment, the enfleshment of Christ in the world. So over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to attempt to capture who we are as called by Jesus. And my hope is to demonstrate that if we simply do what we're called to do as church, it's profoundly radical. Radical HVUC. So kids, I'm not calling you kids. Let's talk about how creating space for kids is a radical part of who we are and what we're called to be. Matthew chapter 18, Alan read it for us earlier, but let me have a go at it. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus called a little child to them and placed the child among them. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lonely position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." Where is Christ? Wherever children are welcome. Now, Jesus' teaching here about kids comes out of a very specific question. His disciples want to know who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Who's the best in God's vision for the world? It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination to understand where a question like this would come from, right? As Jesus has been talking about his upside down empire of love, inclusion, he's been contrasting it with Rome and all of its, violence and fear. And the disciples are trying to figure out each one where they stack up in the Jesus way. They've gone all in on Jesus. So now they're feeling like it's time for a performance review. Who stands out to God? Who's like CEO? Who's VP? Who's the greatest? And I think it makes sense that they would ask this question because everywhere else in life, the ranking system is pretty clear, right? Like in the ancient world that was defined by patriarchy, they all knew that there was men on the top and then women and then kids. In a world of classism, they know where they stack up, based on like family name and net worth. In a world marred by physical violence, they know where they rank based on like body size and military rank and physical fitness. Like it's just all really clear. Do you remember when we could travel? The good old days when traveling was a thing, and you'd be waiting to board a flight, and every airline mandated a very clear pecking order. First on the plane would be the first and the business class passengers. Then like the Air Canada elite members, they got on first, so they get all the good seats and all the overhead storage. Then everyone else gets on. They close zone 3, then they close zone 4, and finally zone 5. Our world functions on countless scales where people are ranked greatest to least and least to greatest. What executive level are you? Manager? Senior manager? VP? Senior VP? Do you drive a 3 series, a 5 series, or a 7 series? How many followers do you have on social? Right? There's just countless indicators we use to rank who fits where. So Jesus' friends and followers are asking a legit question. Hey, how does the ranking work in God's vision for the world? Who's the greatest? Now, implicit in that question is an assumption of competition. Because if someone's the greatest, that means they have to be better or ahead of someone else. There may be many who are great, but the greatest has somehow outperformed the other. Compared to the other people, they're just better. To be the greatest is to be one up on the rest. Now, let me hit pause, time out for just a second, because I don't want to be misunderstood here. I'm all for greatness. But greatness and greatest are different. I think we have an actual moral responsibility to maximize the gifts and the talents that God has given us. Like if you're really good at math, be the best mathematician you can be. If you're musical, like lean in, master your craft, be the best you can be at what you do. Yes, like go for it. Our world needs you to do what only you can do really well. But being the best you and achieving all you can is a different drive and ambition than the drive to be better, ahead, greater than them. See that? The question these disciples are asking Jesus is a competitive question. Who's the greatest? Who's on top? Who ranks the highest? Where do I stack up? Where is my value to God compared to those other people? Isn't it true that there's something almost primal in us that thrives on knowing we're just a little bit ahead? We're just a little bit better off than them. There's a parable about a guy who's gardening in his backyard. And one day he's back there and he's digging away in the garden, just doing whatever he's doing. And his shovel hits something hard, but it's not a rock. It has a tinniness to it. So he keeps digging and he pulls out this lamp, but it's covered in mud and soil. So he begins to wipe all the dirt and the grime off this lamp. And as he rubs it, as you can imagine, out comes a genie. And this genie says, "Thank you so much for freeing me from the confines of the lamp. I will grant you one wish, anything you want." So the guy doesn't need long to think, and he's just about to speak when the genie's like, well, hold on just 1 second. Before you speak your wish, you need to know this. Whatever wish I grant you, I will grant double to your neighbor. So the man thinks for a moment, and he asks the genie, "You mean if I wish for $1 million?" And the genie interrupts and says, "Yes. If you wish for $1 million, I will grant your neighbor $2 million." And this gardener says, "Well, wait. So if I wish for fame and fortune," and the genie says, "Yes, your neighbor will get twice as much fame and twice as much fortune." So the gardener pauses and he thinks on his wish carefully. And after a couple moments, he turns and, with a cold, matter-of-fact stare, looks at the genie and says, "My wish is that you would make me blind in one eye." Okay, that might have been a little bit dark for Mother's Day. But what this parable is trying to tell us is that sometimes our drive isn't to be the best us possible, to enjoy what we have and what we can do. What we're really after is being ahead of the other. The drive to compete, the drive to source our value and our meaning in our life based on where we rank compared to them. That's real. Like, who's the greatest? Who's the thinnest? Who's the smartest? Who's the fittest? Who's the richest? Who's the Martha Stewartiest? Who's the greatest? And with this question now suspended in the air, Jesus pulls in a child. Now, he's been known to do this from time to time. Like when he's got 5,000 hungry people looking at him to be fed, he pulls in a child who carries only 2 fishes and 5 loaves of bread, yet somehow for Christ, the child has exactly what's needed for the moment. And in this moment, into this question, a child becomes the divine response. Truly, I tell you, Jesus says, unless you change, remember, he's looking at his disciples, he says, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Okay, can I just say, one of the heartbreaking things about our world today, and I want to go on record and saying I'm not sort of like the world is going to hell in a handbasket kind of preacher. And the more you get to know me, like I just don't do that. I don't do that. But I think one of the things we've missed as a culture, and one of the things we as the people of God need to offer a radical alternative on, is the cultural trend to immerse our kids competitively in everything. Like it's no longer, hey, I want my kid to play hockey. It's become, I want my kid to play triple A, so they need the $200 stick and the skating coach and the shooting coach and the trainer and the dietitian. It's like long gone are the days where the 7-year-old hits the puck around the frozen pond because it's fun. It feels like it's become pick the kids up from school, drive them to Kumon so they can be best in class in math, then to piano lessons, then pick something up at the drive-through to eat in the car before rep soccer and home to do a couple hours of mathletics on the computer. Jesus tells his followers to change and become like children, but it seems like we keep trying to change and form our children into this constant need to be the greatest. Compete, be the greatest. It's like Jesus is saying here, just stop, time out, T-game. Can you take a deep breath? Because maybe it's us that's missed something. Maybe God's kingdom, God's way is different than our drive to compete, to be the greatest. Become like a child, Jesus tells us. Become like a child. Okay, is your first adult instinct at all like mine? Where you're like, as soon as you hear Jesus say become like a child, you're thinking like, okay, what does that mean? What do I have to do to achieve childlikeness? What do I need to do to check that box? How do I get this right? What's the answer? Tell me what to do. I want to be like the greatest at being like a little child, right? Right? Like that's in us. What is Jesus referring to when he says we need to become like a little child? What's he talking about? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Jesus doesn't say. And I'd be really leery of anyone who was quick to jump in and speak for Jesus on this one. He says, become like little children. There are so many qualities about little children that Jesus could be referring to. Is he referring to one specific quality, to all of them? He doesn't say. And I wonder if that's actually the point. Because when you look at verse 5 where Jesus says, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. The word used for welcome in the original language is the Greek word dekomai, which has strong connotations of patience, embrace, presence, and openness. The idea is Jesus is saying to these men, these disciples who culturally probably just dismiss kids, Jesus says, turn to them, embrace them, like make space for kids, be present and open for children. All your cares, all your concerns, all your worrying about where you stack up in the hierarchy, when you make space in your life for kids, when you're present with a child, when your life is open to the little ones, that's when your life is great. That's when you're living something beautiful. That's when you've made space for the divine to move in your life. I think Jesus knows that if he just gives us the 3 ways you need to be like little children, we would just take that information, chase after the outcome, likely neglecting the part where we actually value and be present with kids, learning from them, laughing with them, exploring alongside with them. When you make space for a child, you make space for Christ. I mean, think about the implications of that. So often we think of the spiritual moments in life as being that spectacular sunrise or sunset, maybe hearing Handel's Messiah or visiting Notre Dame Cathedral or singing our favorite hymn, a poetic prayer, or hearing a good sermon. Like all wonderful, great things. But Jesus says maybe the most spiritual thing we can do is singing Sharon, Lois, and Bram 30 times a morning because it brings joy and giggles to a child. And somehow it creates something better in us. What's radical? What's essential for Humber Valley as a Christ-centered community? What would it mean for us to push against the status quo of relentless competition in our world? Jesus says it would look like a church that prioritizes the presence of children. It looks like a community that has a waiting list of people looking to pitch in Sunday school because that's where the real stuff happens. It looks like a church that can play, a church who knows how to have fun, a church who doesn't hear the cry of a child as an interruption in worship, but as the cry of one of us worshiping. And in that, Christ is present. This lockdown will lift. And if you're like me and you're locked down with kids, most days you're thinking to yourself, like, I need a break. I would love a night out, a break from bedtime routine, or I'd take a business trip, or I'm just exhausted of hearing my name called 30 times a minute, right? And what you're feeling as a parent or a guardian or a caregiver is normal. It's 100% okay. And somehow, in the chaos and the exhaustion of that, the promises, the presence of our kids is the presence of Christ. And if you don't have children locked down with you, and you right now would do anything to have the grandkids or the nieces and the nephews around, like you long for the day when things open up and you can hear kids playing again. Yes, right? Feel that, be in that. That is a primal spiritual longing. And it will come. We will get there. And there will be an army of parents ready to share in this in the spiritual blessing of you spending time with their kids. I promise parents will be ready for you to have some time with their kids. Being people who create intentional time and space for kids is profoundly radical. Today, as we celebrate Mother's Day, may we hear the divine invitation for all of us to birth the spaces and moments in life where children are always welcome. For when you open space for a child, you welcome the Christ. And this is the good news, the gospel of Jesus.